What's up, guys? This your boy Red Haven again. We are back with another episode. YouTube's Darkest Videos, episode 6. Let's get it.
5 feet.
It's the night he came home.
14 feet. 15 feet.
Cigar 2, I'm at the corner.
August 4th, 2021, a New Jersey police officer named John Nunez pulls over a speeding car in the township of North Bergen at 1:49 in the morning. Inside the vehicle was a 27-year-old passenger named Alexis Rodriguez, who was accompanied by the driver, 24-year-old Luis Fernando Ceballos, whom the officer had witnessed driving down a heavily populated street going well over 100 miles per hour.
You can shut the car off and give me a license, registration, and insurance. The reason for the years. I know. That's why I stopped him. Yeah, that's why I'm stopping you for reckless driving, careless driving, speeding, and the lights you ran, okay? You're doing at least 100 on Kennedy Boulevard. All right, man? You almost struck my car because I was making a right turn. All right.
Luis's driving was reckless, to say the least, apparently almost striking the officer's car and several others as he sped through town, breaking numerous traffic laws.
How to make the right turn? Lights turning yellow and woof. The next light on 66, red. Woof. You're probably showing off for the girl.
Despite this, Officer Nunez was sympathetic to the pair, as they were young and they were even on their first date. And despite there being grounds for a harsh punishment in a case like this, he made the decision to issue only 3 tickets, assuming that this whole situation would be enough of a learning lesson for Luis to never make the same mistake again, telling him that,
Sorry, we're on a first date, being
That's fine, but almost killing each other is not the way to start on a first date.
Because it just got really carried.
before leaving the couple with some final words of advice.
All right, man. Get home safe.
Nunez then turns back to his car as the couple drives off to continue their romantic evening elsewhere, hopefully this time in a much safer manner.
16 feet. 17 feet.
Yo, this is the same kid. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
At approximately 2:13 that very same morning, Officer John Nunez would be called to the scene of a nearby accident, only to arrive and discover that the car involved in the wreck was the one that he had just let go, only a mere 10 minutes before. In the vehicle, now destroyed past the point of recognition, were Luis and Alexis, whose bodies were so mangled that just by looking from afar, Officer Nunez immediately knew that the crash had been fatal.
We're gonna need a crash team, sir. Crash team, we need a crash team. That's the same car I just had. Fatal. Oh my God. Oh my God. Yo, that's the same car, bro. That's the same car, man.
The realization from the officer is devastating, as over the next 2 hours on the scene, you can hear him try and grapple with the situation, talking to fellow officers and even a paramedic, just trying to make sense of what had happened.
That's the same car I just had, Sarge. What happened? That's the same car I just had, man. What did you have? That I stopped him for speeding. Are you okay? Yeah, bro, I'm good. It's just, like, bro, I just told you, slow down, man. Like, you just stopped that car? Yeah, just hit him off with 3. Like, oh, that was the same car? Yeah, I told him, like, bro, slow down. They're making me get checked out. But I'm fine, man. It sucks. Like, I just literally stopped him for the same thing. Like, yo, relax, slow down, bro. And she's like, no, it's my fault. We're just trying to get home, but it's not your fault. They get into an accident. And I had him stop a couple minutes before.
For speedy?
Yeah.
Based on the knowledge and news reports that have since been released, another driver had been backing his large semi-truck into a local business to make a delivery when suddenly the couple crashed into his vehicle. And as it turns out, this was far from a freak accident, as despite the warnings from Nunez, it appears that Luis took his words not as a lesson to be learned, but as further fuel for his ego, believing that he could get away with anything on the road. as evident by the fact that just 5 seconds before the crash, it was determined that Luis had been traveling at 124 miles per hour, even faster than before he was pulled over. The entire clip is genuinely heartbreaking, and in the end, this deadly catastrophe serves as an all too important reminder to drive safely on the road, as the video has since been shared all across the internet, where it's since found a home here on the dark side of YouTube.
19 feet. 20 feet. Think. Slow down.
Costumes from costumes from $1.83 to $3.99.
If the valve was suddenly open and your arm was near,
Skeletons of strange animals litter the surf.
As evidenced by our first clip, the fairly mundane task of driving can quickly become life-altering within just the blink of an eye. 1 minute you're cruising along enjoying your ride, and the next you're encountering something straight out of a nightmare. It's really no wonder why dashcam videos have become so popular throughout the horror space, showcasing horrific accidents, robberies, and all sorts of other disturbing moments. But back in 2019, a clip of a similar nature surfaced that grabbed the attention of the entire internet, not just based on its concerning imagery, but the seemingly unexplained mystery left behind in its wake. On the 30th of December 2019, a motorist was enjoying a drive on Highway 1 in San Francisco, California. The route took them high above the sea with an open cliff face showing the vast beauty of the ocean. It's one of the most visually stunning routes in the entire country, but on this particular day, for this particular driver, the beauty of the landscape would be shattered by a fleeting glimpse of something utterly terrifying.
911, what is the location of your emergency?
That afternoon, police would receive a 911 call from the driver, stating that they had witnessed what they believed to be a car falling off the edge of the cliff face, which stood hundreds of feet above the water below. It happened in just a split second, almost too fast to fully comprehend, causing the driver to question whether what they saw was real or just a figment of their imagination. A question that would only be answered by the dashcam that just so happened to be rolling at the time of the incident. The clip is concise, but it did in fact confirm the driver's account that a car had gone over the edge, as the footage cuts off almost exactly as the vehicle appears to go airborne, where it would have been met with a tragic drop into the rocky ocean below. And perhaps most disturbing of all is the speed at which the car was traveling, as it appears as if the brakes were never so much as touched. Within just minutes of the call, rescuers were already arriving on scene, where they would discover tire tracks in the sandy dirt leading right off the edge of the cliff, perhaps an unsurprising indication that the car had actually gone over. But what was surprising was something that happened to be missing from the scene entirely, as when they looked down into the water below, there was no vehicle. Immediately, crews scoured the scene in rescue boats, combing the area in the hopes that somehow the driver could still be alive, and yet they found nothing. No sign of a driver, and no sign of
Yo, that's crazy. If I was to see something like that, I wouldn't know what to do.
any vehicle. Despite the area being diligently searched over the following days and weeks, all that would be found were a few car parts that were never even matched to the make and model that appeared to go off the cliff that day. And even stranger, despite that exact type of car being determined from the video, no one came forward to report any friends or family members missing who might have owned the same type of car. And this was a unique vehicle too, a green 2009 Lexus SUV, not really one that you would typically see driving around too often. And yet, despite this video being shared all over the news and across the internet, no one seemed to recognize it, and no missing persons cases were linked to this video, leading to the search being concluded with no definitive proof ever being established that a vehicle had landed in that location, or that anyone had even been involved. It was like it never even happened, as the vehicle had just disappeared as soon as the video ended. The clip immediately became a mystery here on the internet, with theories being thrown all around, ranging from something supernatural having happened, to the car somehow being swept up before investigators had gotten there, perhaps entering the water at the perfect angle to which no debris was left behind. But maybe one of the most compelling theories at the time was the idea that the video itself wasn't even real, with experts even diving into this theory to see if they can find any proof that this was CGI. Yet their investigation found no evidence that this was the case. And despite this footage seemingly making no sense at all, this video was all too real, and was now left completely unexplainable, as the mystery would fall out of headlines and quickly be forgotten. Until the morning of April 29th, 2020. Almost exactly 5 months after this dashcam footage was taken, swimmers at the nearby Montara State Beach would stumble upon an object floating in the distance. And upon further inspection, the realization would set in that this object was actually a body. Her name was Tracy Sinclair, a woman from the area who just so happened to have been missing around the very same time as this infamous clip. And when police would search her auto records, they discovered that she did in fact own a dark green Lexus SUV from the year 2009, giving us at least a better idea of who was in the vehicle at the time it crashed, and the fact that a vehicle had in fact crashed to begin with. However, it's still unknown why Tracy was never connected to the case before her body was found, despite her fitting the profile perfectly. Plus, we still don't know why her car went off the cliff in the way it did. But given the fact that the brakes didn't seem to have been pressed, many seem to have settled on the idea that the crash was, unfortunately, intentional. But perhaps the strangest part of this all is, to this day, that green Lexus has still never been recovered, nor have any of its parts, leading to the mystery lingering for many across the web who are still left unsatisfied by its conclusion. But for the family of Tracy Sinclair, I'm just glad that they can now take some solace in having some measure of closure to their dark, devastating loss.
It's the great pumpkin. Your arm would be like trying to
The passers.
Before we get into our next video, as you guys already know, this channel here is all about the mysterious and the spooky, which is why I am so excited to be joining Mr. Ballin and Ballin Studios, a team who not only understands the world of dark storytelling, but who have taken these strange, dark, and mysterious stories to a whole new level. I've been a huge fan of Mr. Ballin for forever, as he truly understands how to tell these real-life horrific stories in an engaging and creepy way, usually hiding some sort of twist at the very end that I never saw coming at all, and while also doing so in an incredibly
The passers-by are characters from travelers' tales. At the bottom, it's dark and virtually lifeless. Above, there's just empty sky.
Our next case takes us to what would best be described as an environmental anomaly. As hidden within the outskirts of Mitsero, Cyprus, exists a body of water known simply as the Red Lake. As the name would suggest, this small secluded lake consists of red water that varies in shade throughout the year. In some instances it appears bright red, while in others it almost looks blood-like. This anomaly is caused by various blends of minerals found within the soil, as well as runoff from a nearby abandoned mine, which was once used to extract iron ore and gold back in the 50s. Not only did this cause the water to change its shade permanently, but it also turned it highly toxic, and swimming here is strictly prohibited due to the danger that the water poses, with some going as far as to even call it an acid lake. This hasn't stopped curious tourists from visiting the area, however. And as a matter of fact, the dark allure of this deadly lake seems to only drive curiosity, leading it to become a semi-popular location for extreme tourism. And those brave enough to journey out there have gifted us some truly stunning footage. Like this video from YouTuber 2 Wheels 4 Rotors, which shows a stunning overview of this deep red lake from the vantage point of a remote-controlled drone, providing us with a full view of the lake's beauty. But while most choose to view the water from afar, others prefer a closer look, as some have even been brave enough to make the venture down to the shores themselves, with the one video that stands out above the rest belonging to YouTuber Sarah Funk.
So I discovered that there is a red lake called Mitasero. It's about 20 kilometers from Nicosia. Most people don't even know it exists. We're gonna go check it out.
In 2017, the well-known vlogger and her boyfriend traveled to Cyprus with the goal of making it to the water's edge, documenting the entire adventure and showcasing just how remote the area is and how difficult it is to access, while giving their commentary on the frightening landscape.
This is what like murder episodes are made out of, okay? Because it's always like a young American couple went on vacation to Cyprus. They went to see a red lake where nobody went, but they figured out why. And like it just never see us again.
It smells so bad here. It's like so gross. It just like feels like death. You know what I mean?
Eventually, their trek takes them all the way down to the shoreline, where Sarah stands dangerously close, taking a photo of the deep red water. But though both of these videos are interesting in their own unique ways, it would be a stretch to call them dark. And for years upon their release, they really weren't, as it wouldn't be until 2019 when it would be revealed just how disturbing these videos actually were. In April of that year, Red Lake and its surrounding area were pummeled by relentless rainstorms, leaving much of the region flooded, including the nearby mineshaft. And within that mineshaft, a traveler would discover the decomposed remains of a woman, whose body had been flushed out by the rain, dislodging her corpse from a shallow grave she was placed in. And she wasn't the only one either, as after that discovery, the mine would be searched thoroughly, where yet another woman's body would be found, with both women having passed away due to strangulation, indicating that perhaps this was the work of a serial killer. And so the entire area within and around the mine would be searched from top to bottom, looking for clues or even more bodies. Though it wouldn't be until investigators turned their attention to Red Lake that they would uncover the true extent of the killer's work.
Police in Cyprus investigating a suspected serial killer have uncovered another body close to an abandoned mine where the bodies of 2 other women have already been found. An officer in the Cypriot army has confessed to killing 5 women and the daughters of 2 of his victims.
Within the water, 5 more bodies would be found, 3 of which belonging to adult women that too had been strangled to death, just like the previous 2 found in the mineshaft. Although disturbingly, the final 2 victims were merely children who belonged to 2 separate of the victims. The case was shocking and took Cyprus by storm, as a suspect would quickly come to the forefront and eventually confess to the killing of all 7 victims, admitting that he had buried their bodies in the mineshaft or dumped them within the lake. His name was Nikos Metaxas, a military officer who had used a popular dating app to find women in the area before proceeding to strangle each of them. In his confession, he claimed that 2 of the women were planning on pimping out their daughters, and that he not only had to kill the mothers, but he had to kill the children themselves in order for them to be free. And if these killings couldn't get any more deranged, of the 5 adult victims, all of them were migrant workers who had moved to the area in a desperate attempt to find work, even though this type of work came with limited rights, as the justice system allegedly doesn't treat them the same way as if they were regular citizens. It was evident that Nikos knew this too and chose these victims very carefully, as he knew that their disappearances would never be properly investigated. Which was right, as supposedly law enforcement never even so much as looked into their disappearances. The context of this location makes these travel videos extremely chilling, as these tourists were literally venturing into a serial killer's dumping grounds. Though there is a reason why I chose these two videos as prominent examples. You see, Nikos Metaxas didn't just dump his victims' bodies in the water. As for 4 of the victims, he first killed them, then bound them, then stuffed them into suitcases, before throwing them inside the water, as a way to assure that the bodies would be submerged. Though years later, one just so happened to wash up to shore, where we can see it from a distance in 2 wheels, 4 rotors video, as his drone flies directly over top of it. Though this isn't nearly as shocking as Sarah Funk's video. As she crouches by the water's edge, just feet away from it. With neither of these 2 creators having any clue that in these moments they were actually videotaping the trapped remains of a lost soul. By the end of the investigation, all 7 victims were uncovered and finally given a proper burial, with their names being Mary Rose Tiburcio, Arian Palanas Lozano, Asmita Kadaka Bista, Eleno Natalia Buena, Maricar Valdez Ariquila, Livia Florentina Buena, and Sierra Ariquila. The case was officially closed in June of 2019, when Nikos was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms, and will thankfully never see the outside of a prison again. However, his actions have left a permanent dark stain on the work of unknowing creators all across YouTube.
The other boy, but as the moon rose, he turned into a...
As the cat
Some to-dos show up unexpectedly. Petco helps you cross off each one easy.
As the cat came free, the rushing water grabbed the driver.
Hallo und guten Tag aus Berlin.
Ja, wir haben es tatsächlich auf uns genommen.
It was July 24th, 2010, a day in which seemingly the entire country of Germany was ready to celebrate, as it was time yet again for another long-awaited Love Parade. This music festival had run off and on dating all the way back to 1989, where it's hosted some of the most popular musical acts in all of the world, as well as millions and millions of people. And it had grown to be so popular that during the event in 2008, an unbelievable 1.69 million people had been in attendance for what was essentially one of the largest parties on the entire planet. And the 2010 festival was set to be no different, with event organizers expecting a turnout of millions and millions of people. This amount of people coming together for any event is always going to be a logistical and public safety nightmare. Though despite event organizers and officials from the city it was being hosted in expressing their concerns over the size of the venue and its ability to fit so many people, the event was greenlit anyway, and it was determined that should anything go awry, there were proper channels for guests to evacuate in a quick and safe manner. And so on that July morning, thousands began lining up to experience this one-of-a-kind music festival. To control the crowd flow, the venue offered 2 large entry points that would lead the incoming crowd through a large tunnel which converged into a single main ramp. This ramp would then take the festival goers directly to and from the venue itself, where the party was already getting started. And to help with crowd strain, an additional smaller exit ramp was set up to help manage the high volume of people. And based on the footage found here on YouTube, it seems that at the beginning, people had been flowing in and out of the area with little to no issues, with most enjoying the moment knowing that they were part of history. Though very quickly, a problem would arise. as after just a few hours, the venue itself was supposedly filled to capacity. As a result, law enforcement set up a corridor blocking each of the entrances, as well as a third located on the ramp leading into the venue, in an attempt to stop the crowd from entering the festival. Though this didn't stop the crowd from growing outside the main entrances, as after just minutes, hundreds of thousands of people had gathered, each of whom were desperately trying to get in, pushing their way towards the first and second police corridors. As this was happening, the third corridor was also facing immense strain, as hundreds of thousands of people were attempting to leave the venue through that main ramp, meaning that at all three barricades stood countless patrons, all attempting to go in converging directions. Due to this strain, the first corridor would be dissolved, which was followed by law enforcement's decision to remove the second corridor as well, meaning that in an instant, all of these people were now rushing in directly towards each other. And worst of all, despite being allowed into the tunnel, that third corridor remained closed, leading to those walking through the entrance being met by another police barricade, as well as hundreds of thousands of people who were attempting to go the opposite way. It was the perfect storm. And now, each of these massive crowds were colliding, with everyone trying to force their way through in their own directions within this hopeless mass of humanity. Across YouTube, you can find various clips showcasing the commotion of that day, some taken from afar, some were taken by those who didn't even know anything was wrong, and some taken by those who were trapped in the crowd themselves. And with the crowd pushing now from all directions, there was just no stopping the force, leading to them being squeezed and slowly suffocated, with the pressure being so great that some had their entire rib cages completely crushed in. The visuals from that day are horrific, with some attempting to climb over the walls, while others had their lifeless bodies lifted above the crowd in a desperate attempt to get them medical attention. But it was helpless, with the terror also being captured by survivors who would give accounts of what they experienced within that massive crush of people. I saw one girl they were trying to resuscitate and she had broken legs. Her boyfriend was near her, but there was nothing he could do. They put a cover over her head in the end. This is the first time I had ever seen people die. I saw 25 people piled on top of one another, a huge heap. The people couldn't get any air. I saw the dead in there. The number of people I saw lying on the floor was ridiculous. They had stamp marks on their faces. It wasn't until I saw people being resuscitated that I understood how serious this was. I don't even know if they were alive or dead. And to me, the power of this crowd is best shown within the CCTV footage that was overlooking the entire entrance ramp, as you can see people being pushed around from all different directions in a disturbingly unnatural manner, almost like waves in an ocean. In the uncontrollable frenzy, 652 people were left injured, with 21 sadly passing away, many of whom had died right there within the sea of people. In a following investigation, claims were made bashing the police on the scene for their response to the disaster, while the then mayor of Duisburg, the city where the event was held, named Adolf Sauerland, received heavy criticism and even death threats for greenlighting the event, with Adolf later going on to be impeached from office and lose his position entirely. And of course, the event organizers themselves faced extreme backlash, especially once it was revealed that the venue wasn't even filled at the time, and could have easily fit hundreds of thousands more inside, making the third barrier which ultimately caused this entire human crush completely unnecessary. Though in the end, no one took responsibility for the tragedy, and no parties were formally convicted of any crimes.
Drink? Oh, it can happen this Halloween. They are the children of the No one knew.
As you watch the following recreations of actual Delta P incidents, ask yourself if you have, on occasion, ventured into situations without being thoroughly prepared.
It was the start of a typical day for Kazim Ali as he dives into the waters off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago, proceeding to swim towards a large structure looming in the murky sea. Kazim was working the unique and highly specialized job of being an underwater welder, tasked with making repairs to a multitude of submerged structures that could only be reached by scuba diving. Kazim was employed by the Pariah Fuel Trading Company, who had tasked him and 4 others to perform maintenance on an inactive oil pipeline. This pipeline was incredibly long, going on for 1,200 feet below the water, with its 2 ends coming up to a 90-degree angle and rising up to the surface, with these vertical pipes being coined as risers. The system was initially created so that ships could park at the furthest riser and transport their oil through the pipe and out of the other riser, where it would be collected by Pariah. The area in which Kazim and the 4 other divers would be focusing their work on that day was known as Berth 6, which was capped by a hyperbaric chamber, or an airtight enclosure that would allow them to breathe and properly use their welding equipment, despite technically being underwater. In the video, Kazim approaches the chamber, climbing inside when he's met with his colleagues Faisal Kurban, Rishi Nagasar, Yusuf Henry, and Christopher Boudrim, whom he all considered close friends by this point, sharing a close bond over their unusual profession. Once inside, the crew would remove their scuba gear, as they were now able to breathe the fresh air from the chamber, before going on to start their work on the pipe. The plan initially was to remove an inflatable plug from inside the old tube that was placed there to prevent the oil from the pipe from being contaminated by the surrounding water. With that process being briefly shown in the footage, until suddenly, the footage goes dark. It all happened so quickly that even the camera couldn't capture what had just transpired. One frame we see the inside of the chamber, and the next, it's pitch black, with nothing but the noise of rushing water and the faint sound of muffled screaming. Until finally we hear a voice, revealing in part the extent of the situation that had just unfolded. As the plug was removed from the pipe, in a time less than even a split second, the changing of pressure caused an instant suction in a phenomenon known as delta P, which proceeded to pull all the contents within the chamber inside of the tube, meaning that all the equipment, the air tanks, the tools, and the divers themselves were sucked into the pipe and were now being pulled at an impossible speed through the 1,200-foot-long tube system. Now, this pipe was incredibly narrow, at only 36 inches in diameter, and as we hear Kazim being dragged throughout the tunnel, he and the others are repeatedly being struck by their heavy equipment. Yet as they each came to a halt, we hear one of the divers call out to the others, to which, one by one, they all miraculously respond.
I ain't 35 too. I trying to come up. Yeah. Who making all that noise? Come on, all of you, let's figure it out. We gotta go. We gotta start moving.
Not only had the 5 survived the event, but they were all conscious and had managed to stop within an air pocket, meaning that at the right angle they could still breathe. They had somehow survived the nightmare, but had just found themselves in a brand new one. Now lodged deep within the narrow tube, the 5 men were trapped in complete and total darkness. And on top of this, the pipe was filled with old, slippery oil and water, and the group had no way of knowing where exactly they were. Making the situation even more disturbing, all of the divers were badly beaten up by the debris, with some in significantly worse shape than the others, which became evident as the men try and take stock of the situation.
Cuz, everything alright with you? Oh. And your leg break? Your leg, alright. 5. Anything happened to you? Yusuf, anything happened to you? Yeah, boy. What happened?
Alright. And this is where the footage would come to an end. Though for the divers, their ordeal was only just beginning. After minutes of trying to get their bearings straight, it was determined that Christopher Boudrim was not only physically in the best shape, seemingly avoiding any significant injury, but also that his head was in what they believed to be the direction of the chamber, where they had entered the tube. With that chamber being their only hope of escape, as had they accidentally gone to the opposite riser at berth 5, they would have been met within a movable inflatable plug. Chris knew that he would have to be the one to lead the group out, and so together the 5 men linked themselves, connecting their feet with the person below them's shoulders, and began to slowly push their way through the darkness, where they would quickly be met with another problem. Despite the group having landed within an air pocket, Christopher could see that the area ahead of him was completely filled with water, and there was no way of knowing just how long that stretch of water could last. It could be just for a few feet, or it could be for hundreds of feet. Though despite the danger, the 2 men in the front, Christopher and Faisal, decided to press on, leaving the other 3 men who were too injured to take the risk behind. So they moved forward, pushing on and now holding their breath, inching into the unknown, not knowing when or if their next breath would occur. After what must have felt like hours, the 2 managed to break through into the next air pocket, where by some miracle they would also find 2 oxygen tanks, which they would both utilize to help push them further and further through long stretches of water and long air pockets, knowing that at some point they had to be approaching the end. Though the closer they seemingly got, the more Faisal's condition seemed to deteriorate, as the stress of it all seemed to finally catch up with him, leading to him stopping and refusing to go any further, falling into a complete panic and yelling at Christopher to stop too. But Christopher refused, yelling back to him and the 4 others who were now hundreds of feet away that he was going to get them help and that he was going to come back for them. And so he kept moving forward, praying that he would reach the end before his oxygen ran out. Until he hit the edge of the pipe. He had made it back to berth 6, though by this point the pressure was so great that he was physically unable to swim up the tube, and so he grabbed a nearby chain and held on for dear life, waiting and praying that a rescuer would look down the riser. And sure enough, he was eventually met with the sight of a rescue diver who swam in and pulled Christopher to the surface. Somehow, Christopher had survived, escaping one of the most claustrophobic and disturbing situations you could ever imagine. And with the rescuers on the scene, knowing that his friends were still alive, this case was headed for the most improbable happy ending possible. Though there was one glaring problem. Despite Pariah having a rescue crew on scene, saving the life of Christopher, they would come to the conclusion that it was too dangerous to send anyone back in the tube, despite knowing that 4 of the other divers were still trapped inside and were very much alive. And so you might be asking, if they weren't going to dive in, then what was their backup plan? Well, there was none. And after just 12 hours of waiting around, Pariah began preparing death notices for all 4 of the workers, with the CEO even sending a message out on WhatsApp to his colleagues, stating that they were alerting the press that the rescue effort was going to be considered a recovery effort from now on, accepting that the divers had perished. But this wasn't actually true, as all the while you could hear the faint sound of banging coming from the pipe, indicating that the divers were not only alive, but were desperately fighting for their lives, hitting the sides of the pipe so that anyone could hear them. but nothing was done to help them. And so, trapped in that tight, claustrophobic, pitch-black, oil-filled pipe, those 4 divers were left to die slowly. All the while, they likely held on hope for a rescue that was never so much as considered. The sounds of their banging were heard all throughout the day and all throughout the night, until eventually 2 full days later, when the pipe fell silent. Their 4 bodies would be fished out 5 days later, with Christopher being the sole survivor of the incident. This whole tragedy is by far one of the most disturbing I've ever encountered. And the sheer terror of this moment when the men were initially sucked in, and the realization that they had been pulled into the pipe, is only made more horrific once you know the fate of these trapped men. The ones who were severely injured never had a chance to begin with, because the company in charge of their safety literally abandoned them. Christopher became so devastated by the lack of action that he himself even attempted to re-enter the pipe in order to rescue his friends. But he was held back and restrained, as it seemed to be Pariah's plan all along to just wait for the men to die. In the end, Pariah did face legal pushback for the incident itself, as well as the apparent lack of effort in saving the men, though eventually they would be cleared of any wrongdoings.
The goal of this video is to make you aware of the potential for differential pressure situations. Because when it's gotcha, it's gotcha.
Candies of every kind. Bubblegum, lollipops.
A time for children. Parties. Good times. Halloween was a special time. Until he came back for more.
I told you this isn't a man.
Monday, October 21st at 8. TV 50 presents the broadcast television premiere of Halloween.
Well, guys, yo, that last video was crazy. To be honest with you. Yeah, that last video was pretty crazy. That last video was pretty crazy. I ain't even gonna hold you.
And so our story begins. Before it
But yeah, those last few videos was freaking crazy. That's crazy. But this is the end of the show, guys.